Welcome back. As Women's Month ends, we turn to the efforts of the ANC to resurrect its Women's League. In June, the National Executive Committee of the party adopted a recommendation by the National Working Committee that the former Deputy President and former Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, be appointed as the convener of the Women's League National Task Team. Before that, the NEC disbanded the Women's League executive as it had been in charge for more than its term of office. The task team will now have to rebuild the organisation, and it held its first meeting this week. Ms. Mbete joining us now. Thank you so much. You admitted today you were taken aback. In fact, you said your initial reaction that you were being appointed as convener was shock. Why?
Well, I mean, I've just a few years ago retired from active politics and things that send you scuttling up and down the country and getting very busy. So I was not expecting to be drawn back to a hectic space. That's number one. But I also want to say that part of what should be understood is that the Women's League members had never disappeared from the face of the earth. Their activities had in fact been continuing in spite of COVID and everything, but also COVID did impose certain conditions around which it was difficult for people to be active, as in holding meetings that are necessary for an organization to express its life and the fact that people are there. So that's part of what went into the structures needing to be resuscitated. So that's a rather long-winded but a true reflection of what occurred to me when I was chosen to convene the ANC Women's League for its rebuilding, renewal, and going to a conference, hopefully early next year.
Well, thanks for bringing up the history. I was going to say, can you explain the disbanding? So you're saying it's just because meetings weren't held, it wasn't at a point of complete dysfunction in your view?
Not at all, not at all. In fact, as we move around, the truth of the matter is that women are always active. Women don't have to be invited to come together and decide to do things about whatever they are finding around them. So even in this case, yes, in the 8 provinces, the structures needed renewing, relaunching, rebuilding. But in this province, for instance, of Gauteng, the provincial structure is yet to go to a conference. Yeah. So it's not everywhere that everything had come to a standstill. It's simply the COVID period also has been a challenge to every organization, even in the business sector, we know that. So that was part of the picture that needed us to come together, put our heads together and say, how do we start ensuring that we can re-engineer, resuscitate, re-empower, and make sure that people, to the extent that they've been affected by, in particular, the 2-year intense lockdown period, we now went back and were actually now having launched in every province a provincial task team. The provincial task team are now in charge in those provinces, and they are taking the process forward of ensuring that there are regional task teams and therefore be able to go back to launch the branches on the ground.
Ms. Mbete, going back to the disbanding, Batabile Dlamini was at the helm at the time, and some said the Women's League was disbanded to ensure that President Cyril Ramaphosa's supporters could ultimately control the Women's League. Your response to that?
My response is that, people always come up with their own stories. It is very interesting, actually, what you are telling me, because in the ANC, we don't have dustbins to throw our human beings into. What we do is we see that maybe there are challenges here and there. How best can we reconsolidate and put energy back? So Comrade Matabile is still a member of the National Task Team of the ANC Women's League. And in fact, we draw from her experience, her information about certain specifics about the period she has been in leadership. She, like every other former president, is a source of wisdom, a source of understanding. For instance, I've not been in the space of the Women's League immediate activities. So I need to be informed by those who have been around, both Matabile and the former Secretary General Mioho and a comrade who's now in Parliament, Noguzola, Dolashe. They are all people who've been around, and we don't throw away their experience and their insights into how things have been happening, whether negative or positive. So Matabile is still around. She's with us in the NTT.
She is. So she's part of the task team. She has, however, been found guilty of perjury. So some believe that that's very problematic as the ANC tries to show the public that it's changed. What would you say to those who feel that the more things change with the ANC, the more they stay the same?
I can only say that I understand the political space. I understand politics, and I understand the tendency with human characters to focus on the negative in a situation. And I say to you, what we choose to do is concentrate, focus on the positive and say, what can we learn from so and so? And we go where there is information and insights and experience on particular events and stages of what has been happening or what had happened before we were even created. So if, for instance, there were at a certain point in a collective two sides of a story and maybe people were not seeing eye to eye, we go back to both sides and we try and draw on the perspectives that informed both positions and take both of them as we rebuild and we move forward.
Can the ANC Women's League be a player by December in terms of being a player in determining who will be the president of the party? What's the timeline?
The Women's League is part of the ANC, part of the ANC politics, part of the ANC structures and the ANC's doing of everything, even as the ANC prepares itself for the highest decision-making body that will gather in December. The ANC Women's League will be represented in that conference.
Will you support President Cyril Ramaphosa?
I will support the African National Congress. I'm not sure of the detail as to who will be offering themselves or availing themselves for leadership. When that time comes, I as an individual and the Women's League as a structure that is a component of the ANC will take that information and process it and have a position that we will agree upon and as we get into the December conference.
All right, Ms. Mbete, over the years, a lot of questions have been asked about what the Women's League really does for women. I mean, we live in a country with some of the worst rates of abuse against women. Seemingly, the League has been ineffective in changing that. And things have been raised, like the former president. Of course, he was exonerated. He was not found guilty of rape, but the Women's League took a stance against the women and for him, even before that outcome was determined in the courts. Do you agree that this organization has to make more of an impact going forward?
The truth of the record of women's role in the struggle over the decades, the truth of the input, the contribution of the ANC Women's League in influencing the very ANC's positions in different eras of the very struggle for liberation that has brought us now 110 years later is that it has been constructive. The ANC Women's League has always played a positive role in informing positions. The changes in the different challenges in society are a detail, and in fact, it's something we're grappling with as women, as well as the Women's League generally in society. And we continue to raise those issues. So it is not accurate to say the ANC Women's League has not been doing anything. In fact, the fact that we have today a national gender machinery, which is the one we are in touch with to try and help us improve on our ability and our successes in grappling with societal problems, including those that focus on women in society, like the gender-based violence and femicide. Those are the inputs that historically have been made by the ANC Women's League.
All right, we appreciate your time and that you're willing to respond to those criticisms against the Women's League in the past. That was the ANC Women's League National Task Team Head, Baleka Mbete.